First of all, I'd like to apologise for how long it's taken me to get this last episode of this series out to you. This podcast is probably the one closest to my heart, and it's taken me a long time to make sure that I got it right. It's gone through various rewrites, lots of research, and lots of editing. So I hope you can forgive me for the delay, and we'll get right into it on They Didn't Teach That at School. Welcome back to They Didn't Teach That at School, the podcast where we dive into the untold, the overlooked, and the downright fascinating aspects of history, religion, and culture that your textbooks left out. I'm Mark Kerrigan, and in today's episode, the grand finale of our first season, we're going to uncover some shocking truths and hidden stories from early Christianity that might just change how you see the foundations of one of the world's largest religions. We'll begin by journeying back to the early days of Christianity, a time when a small Jewish sect followed the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. This group, deeply rooted in Jewish traditions, was significantly impacted by the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE. We'll explore how this catastrophic event led to the decline of the Jewish Christian sect and paved the way for the rise of Gentile Christianity, thanks in no small part to the rebellious efforts of Paul of Tarsus. Paul, a man who wrote only 7, or possibly 8, of the 13 letters attributed to him in the New Testament, championed the inclusion of Gentiles and the equality of women within the early church. Yet the remaining letters, written in his name, took a starkly different tone. These texts sought to curtail the role of women, possibly as a direct counter to Paul's more progressive views. Was this a deliberate attempt to reinforce patriarchal controls and suppress the influential women who were crucial to the early Christian communities? One such woman was Mary Magdalene. Far from the repentant prostitute we've often been led to believe, Mary was a prominent disciple and the first witness to Jesus' resurrection. Her gospel, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, portrays her as a central figure in early Christianity with deep spiritual insights. So why did the early church go to such lengths to tarnish her reputation and strip her of authority? In this episode, we'll peel back the layers of historical revisionism to reveal the real Mary Magdalene, a leader and visionary, and we'll examine how her legacy was systematically erased by those who sought to consolidate power within a male-dominated church hierarchy. We'll also discuss the strides being made today to change and challenge these archaic attitudes and restore the rightful place of women in the history of Christianity. Join me as we delve into these compelling stories that weren't in your school curriculum but are essential to understanding the complex tapestry of early Christianity. Prepare to have your perspectives challenged and your curiosity ignited on They Didn't Teach That at School. So where do we start? We're going to use some movie analogies in the first section, so it's probably appropriate to listen to Sister Maria.
Let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start.
And that puts us at the book of Genesis. The Bible offers 2 creation stories in the book of Genesis, and they are like 2 competing director's cuts of a blockbuster film. Here's a brief rundown of each. Genesis 1, verses 1 to 2 to 3. In this version, creation is a methodical, ordered process. God, referred to as Elohim, creates the world in 6 days and rests on the 7th. The sequence is as follows: light and dark, sky and sea, land and vegetation, stars and planets, birds and fish, land animals, and finally, humans. Humans are created simultaneously, male and female, in God's image. So the first story is like a meticulous IKEA assembly guide, each step carefully ordered. It's all about the big picture, cosmic forces and the grandeur of creation. In this account, men and women are created equally and simultaneously. It has a clear structure, like a week-long project with milestones. If it was a documentary, it would be a grand epic, probably narrated by Morgan Freeman. The second story, in Genesis 2, verses 4 to 25. This story takes a more hands-on, intimate approach. Here, God, referred to as Yahweh, forms man from the dust and breathes life into him. Then, realizing it's not good for man to be alone, God creates animals and finally a woman from the man's rib. This sequence is less about days and more about a narrative. This second is more like assembling the IKEA furniture without instructions, where God goes, "Instructions? Who needs instructions?" In this version, God is clearly a man. This version is a close-up shot, focusing on the intimate details of forming life. Feels more spontaneous, like God was winging it. Man's lonely? Let's try animals. Nope, that didn't work. All right, let's give a woman a go. Ah, perfect. This is the account that has woman created from man's rib. It has led to centuries of debate over gender roles, and I'm going to have a closer look at that right now. In the original Jewish creation story, there is a single being called Adama, and that's often translated as earthling. Adama was formed from the earth, or the Ha-Adama. This being is androgynous, embodying both male and female aspects. God then split this androgynous being equally into two separate entities, creating man and woman. Well, this version didn't sit well with the early patriarchal leaders. They rewrote the original text to make it more fitting into their narrow view of society. In this new version, God creates man, Adam, from the dust of the ground and breathes life into him. Later, realizing that Adam needs a companion, God creates animals first, but none suffice. Finally, God puts Adam into a deep sleep, takes one of his ribs, and creates a woman, Eve, from it. The clear connotation here is that woman was created from man's rib, emphasizing a derivative and a secondary creation. The original Jewish story portrays a more egalitarian creation, where man and women are part of an original, unified whole, emphasizing inherent equality. The biblical version, where woman is created from man's rib, imposes a hierarchy, with women being secondary to man. The Jewish concept of splitting an androgynous being in half is a metaphor for the equal and integral nature of man and woman. The rib story, on the other hand, creates a linear progression, man first, then woman as a helper. This change reflects the patriarchal norms of the time when the biblical stories were compiled and edited from the original Hebrew texts. A narrative where woman is created from man supports a social structure where men hold primary authority. Unfortunately, nothing has changed in the 1700-odd years of the Church's history. The misogynistic and patriarchal views of the 4th century Church have served to keep women subjugated right into the 21st century. Another classic ploy of the early Church to subjugate women is the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. This Gospel is a non-canonical text discovered in fragments, primarily in the Berlin Codex, in the late 19th century. The Gospel offers a unique perspective on early Christian teachings, focusing on Mary Magdalene as a prominent disciple and leader. The Gospel is attributed to Mary Magdalene, but, like many ancient texts, its true authorship is uncertain. It is believed to have been compiled around the 2nd century CE. The main manuscript is the Berlin Codex, dated to the 5th century CE. The other two fragments in Greek were discovered in the Oxyrhynchus papyrus, dated to the 3rd century CE. The surviving text is incomplete, with significant portions missing, especially at the beginning and the middle. The existing sections include chapters 4 through to 9. The Gospel opens with a discussion between the risen Jesus and his disciples. Jesus emphasizes the importance of inner spiritual knowledge and warns against external religious practices and dogma. After Jesus' departure, the disciples are distressed and uncertain about their mission. Mary Magdalene steps forward, offering comfort and wisdom. She recounts a vision she had of Jesus where he imparted special teaching to her. Mary describes her vision in which Jesus explains the ascent of the soul through various realms, overcoming attachment and material desires. The vision includes encounters with spiritual beings and challenges, emphasizing the soul's journey towards enlightenment and liberation. Peter, and some of the other disciples expressed skepticism and jealousy over Mary's prominent role and the special revelation she received. Levi defends Mary, arguing that Jesus' preference for her and her understanding should be respected. The Gospel ends with the disciples accepting Mary's teaching and setting out to preach. The Gospel portrays Mary Magdalene as a central and authoritative figure in early Christianity, challenging traditional views that marginalise her role. She is depicted as possessing deep spiritual insight and a close relationship with Jesus, who confided in her uniquely. Emphasis is placed on personal spiritual knowledge and inner enlightenment rather than external rituals and hierarchical structures. The Gospel advocates for a direct mystical connection with the divine, often contrasting with the orthodox emphasis on institutional authority. It also highlights early Christian conflicts regarding authority and gender roles, as Mary's leadership faces resistance from Peter and others, reflecting a broader tension within the early Christian community about the role of women. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene provides valuable insights into the diversity of early Christian thought and the existence of a different theological perspective. It offers evidence of early Christian communities that value mystical knowledge and egalitarian principles. Recently, the text has gained renewed interest in contemporary discussions about the role of women in Christianity and the recovery of marginalized voices in religious history. It challenges traditional narratives and encourages a re-examination of the historical role of Mary Magdalene and other women in the early church. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene is a fascinating and complex text that sheds light on early Christian diversity and the prominent role of women in some Christian communities. It highlights the spiritual depth and leadership of Mary Magdalene, advocating for an inner mystical approach to the faith that contrasts with the more institutionalized forms of Christianity. This gospel continues to inspire and provoke thought regarding the historical and contemporary roles of women in religion. But who was Mary Magdalene? Mary Magdalene was a prominent figure in early Christianity, often mentioned in the canonical Gospels. She is described as a devout follower of Jesus. Luke 8:2-3 mentions that Jesus cast 7 demons out of her and that she, along with other women, supported Jesus and the disciples financially. She was at Jesus' crucifixion. She was the first witness to the resurrection. All 4 canonical Gospels credit Mary Magdalene with being the first to encounter the risen Jesus, underscoring her importance. And she was a significant figure in early Christian communities, possibly holding a leadership role. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene and other apocryphal texts highlight her as a key disciple who received special teaching from Jesus. The prominence of this special woman, however, did not sit well with the church leaders who wanted a male-dominated hierarchy based on institutionalized power. Targeted efforts were made to denigrate and demonize Mary, to knock her off her pedestal. The campaign to tarnish Mary Magdalene's reputation began with Pope Gregory I, who conflated her with other women mentioned in the Gospels, such as the unnamed sinner who anointed Jesus' feet and Mary of Bethany. Pope Gregory deliberately labelled Mary Magdalene as a prostitute and created a false narrative that persisted for centuries. There is absolutely no biblical evidence linking Mary Magdalene to prostitution. This misidentification was a deliberate move to undermine her authority and diminish her role in early Christianity. The early church, like the broader society of the time, was very patriarchal. A strong, authoritative female figure like Mary Magdalene posed a threat to the male-dominated ecclesiastical hierarchy. On top of this, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene presented teachings that emphasized personal spiritual knowledge and challenges traditional authority. Denigrating Mary helped suppress these potentially subversive ideas. By portraying Mary as a repentant sinner rather than a leader, the early church aimed to reinforce the notion that women should be penitent and submissive rather than authoritative figures. Mary was a dedicated follower of Jesus, integral to his ministry and the early Christian movement. Her role as first witness to the resurrection granted her a unique and authoritative position amongst Jesus' followers. Early Christian texts outside of the New Testament depict her as a teacher and a leader who received and imparted significant spiritual teachings. Contemporary biblical scholarship has largely debunked the myth of Mary Magdalene as a prostitute. scholars are emphasising her true role as a central figure in early Christianity. The re-evaluation of Mary Magdalene's role often reflects broader cultural shifts towards reorganising and revaluing the contributions of women in history and religion. The denigration of Mary Magdalene as a prostitute by the early church was a calculated move to undermine her authority and diminish her prominent role. This false narrative served to reinforce patriarchal structures and suppress alternative theological perspectives. Modern scholarship and cultural changes are gradually restoring her to her rightful place as a key disciple and leader in the early Christian movement. Mary Magdalene's true legacy is one of devotion, leadership, and significant spiritual authority, attributes that were systematically obscured by the early church to maintain male dominance. Another method the church has employed to subjugate women is by following the letters of that well-known misogynist Paul. Or was he? The Christian scriptures have 13 letters or epistles that have been attributed to the great prophet Paul of Tarsus. Paul, however, actually wrote only 7 of these letters. The letters Paul wrote are Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1 Thessalonians, and Philemon. The letter to the Hebrews may have been written by Paul, but its scholarship is highly debated and generally not considered Pauline by most scholars. In these authentic letters, Paul's on women are surprisingly progressive for his time. Some examples are, in Romans 16, 1-7, Paul mentions several women in leadership roles such as Phoebe, a deacon, Priscilla, a fellow worker in Christ, and Junia, whom he calls outstanding among the apostles. In Galatians 3, verse 28, Paul writes, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." He's promoting equality. In contrast, the remaining 6, or the Deutero-Pauline epistles, contain a more restrictive view on women's roles. In Timothy 2, verses 11-12, "Let a woman learn in silence with all submissiveness. I permit no woman to teach or to have authority over a man. She is to keep silent." Titus 2, verses 3-5, advises older women to be reverent in behaviour and to teach younger women to be submissive to their husbands. This shift in tone from Paul's authentic letters to the Deutero-Pauline letters likely reflect a reactionary stance against Paul's elevation of women. The early Christian movement operated within a deeply patriarchal society. The inclusion and elevation of women would have caused discomfort amongst the more conservative elements within the church. As the church grew, there was a push to standardise teachings and practices, which led to the reinforcement of traditional gender roles to maintain social order. These more restrictive letters were written to counteract Paul's more egalitarian views, reasserting male dominance in the church hierarchy and society. In addition to that, the Roman Empire was patriarchal, and aligning church practices with societal norms might have been a strategic move to gain acceptance and avoid persecution. There also may have been internal disputes within the early Christian communities on the role of women. Authors of the later letter could have been attempting to address these conflicts by emphasising traditional gender roles. Paul's egalitarian statements and the acknowledgement of women leaders was revolutionary. His authentic letters reflect a significant endorsement of women in prominent and influential roles within the early Christian community. The later letters attributed to Paul, but written by others, present a stark contrast. These letters demote women's roles, most likely as a reactionary measure to Paul's more progressive stance. The motive behind these letters was to align the church more closely with contemporary social norms and to consolidate power within a male-dominated hierarchy. The difference in the portrayal of women's roles in these letters highlights a historical power struggle within early Christianity. The shift from equality to subordination reflects broader societal pressures and the complexities of maintaining unity and order within a rapidly growing religious movement. In sum, while Paul was ahead of his time for advocating women's roles, the later authors of the epistles attributed to him were likely attempting to dial back this progress, ensuring the church's alignment with patriarchal norms. And while this is all well and good in the 1st to 4th century CE, there is no excuse for this to have continued well into the 21st century. At any stage in the last 1500 years, the Church could have changed its stance, but it chose to continue to promote a male-dominated hierarchy and place women in a subservient role. Some examples of the persistence of traditional views in modern Christianity are: the Catholic Church does not ordain women as priests. This highest position in the church hierarchy is reserved solely for men. And Catholic doctrine emphasises the complementary but distinct roles of men and women, often reinforcing traditional gender roles. The Eastern Orthodox Church is similar to Catholicism, where it does not ordain women as priests or bishops, and the Church upholds traditional views on the roles of women both in the Church and in the family. Many conservative Protestant denominations also maintain traditional views on women's role. Women are often excluded from pastoral and leadership positions. The Southern Baptist Convention holds that pastoral roles are reserved for men, and women should be submissive in their roles within the family and the church. One of the reasons Paul was so influential and the early church went to so much trouble to counter his teaching on women dates back to that fateful day in the summer of 70 CE. The Jewish Christian sect, initially the main branch of Christianity, emerged directly from the teachings of Jesus and his immediate disciples. They were deeply rooted in Jewish traditions and the belief that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah. This group predominantly resided in Jerusalem and adhered to Jewish laws and customs. On the 30th of August 70 CE, the Roman army smashed its way into Jerusalem and set fire to the temple. Over the course of the next month, the Romans captured the upper and lower sections of the city, burning the buildings and slaughtering or enslaving the citizens as they went. Titus, the Roman general in charge of the siege, left only 3 towers standing as a tribute to the city's former might. The Jewish Christian sect faced a significant crisis. Jerusalem was the centre of Jewish Christian activity, and the church leadership, along with the city, had now been destroyed. This severely disrupted their organisational structure and religious practices. The Jewish Christians, along with other Jewish inhabitants, were scattered. Most were dead, some were enslaved, and the rest had fled the ruined city. This dispersion weakened their influence and their ability to maintain a cohesive community. Paul of Tarsus, formerly known as Saul, played a pivotal role in transforming Christianity from a Jewish sect into a predominantly Gentile religion. Despite initial and significant resistance, mainly from Jesus' brother James, Paul embarked on a missionary journey across the Roman Empire, preaching to non-Jews or Gentiles and establishing multiple Christian communities. Paul argued that Gentiles did not need to follow Jewish laws, such as circumcision and dietary restrictions, to be Christians, making Christianity more accessible to a broader audience. Paul focused on major urban centres like Corinth, Ephesus, and Rome, where diverse populations and cultures intersected. This strategy facilitated rapid growth in the spread of Christianity. Paul's letters, or epistles, to various Christian communities addressed theological issues, provided guidance, and reinforced his teaching. These letters became foundational texts for the Christian doctrine. Some early Jewish Christians saw Paul's approach as disobedient or heretical because he relaxed the requirements of Mosaic law for Gentile converts. Despite this, Paul's mission thrived due to the following factors. 1. By removing the barriers of strict Jewish law, Paul made Christianity more appealing to the Gentiles who were interested in monotheism but unwilling to fully convert to Judaism. 2. Over time, key Christian leaders, including Peter and James, came to accept Paul's mission to the Gentiles, though not without considerable debate and tension. And 3. The fall of Jerusalem and the subsequent weakening of the Jewish Christian sect created a power vacuum that allowed Gentile Christianity, with Paul as a prominent figure, to gain dominance. The Jewish Christian sect's influence diminished after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE. The loss of their central hub and the dispersal of their community left a vacuum that Paul's Gentile Christianity filled. Paul's strategic disobedience, by welcoming Gentiles without requiring adherence to Jewish laws, helped Christianity spread across the Roman Empire and evolved into a predominantly Gentile faith. This transformation marked a significant turning point in Christianity, paving the way for Christians to become a major world religion. Paul's influence on the early church cannot be understated. This is why 6 subsequent letters were written and attributed to Paul to undermine his progressive stance and place women back where the early church believed they belonged. The unfortunate result of this was that as the centuries rolled on and men remained a power in the church, little was done to rectify this matter. Texts fabricated by the early church are still used to this day to justify the subjugation of women within the church. Not all, however, is doom and gloom. The Anglican Communion has been at the forefront of promoting gender equality within the church for many years. Provinces within the Anglican Communion, such as the Church of England and the Episcopal Church in the USA, currently ordain women, allow them to serve as bishops. Denominations such as the United Methodist Church, the Episcopal Church, and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America also ordain women as pastors, priests, and bishops. Some theologians and scholars work towards developing inclusive theologies that emphasize the role of women in church and society. And finally, there are movements within Christianity that continue to advocate for reinterpreting scriptures and church traditions to promote gender equality. These movements challenge traditional interpretations that historically marginalized women. While many Christian denominations maintain traditional views on women's role, progress has been made towards gender equality within the wider church. The ordination of women and their inclusion in leadership roles and the rise of Christian feminism highlight ongoing efforts to challenge and change archaic attitudes. The struggle for gender equality within Christianity reflects broader societal changes and the ongoing tension between tradition and modernity. As more denominations embrace progressive views, the hope is for a more inclusive and equitable future for women in the church. However, the pace of that change varies widely and resistance remains strong in many quarters, ensuring that this remains a dynamic and evolving issue. Embracing the original letters of Paul would be a major step forward in this campaign. As we wrap up this final episode in our first series, it is clear that the early history of Christianity is far more complex and intriguing than the simplified narratives we often encounter. From the rise and fall of the Jewish Christian sect to the transformative influence of Paul's mission to the Gentiles, we see a faith that has evolved amidst turmoil and debate. We've uncovered the significant yet often overlooked role of women in early Christianity. Figures like Mary Magdalene were not just peripheral characters, but were central to the movement as leaders, visionaries, and first witnesses to the resurrection. The deliberate efforts to denigrate Mary Magdalene's reputation by labelling her a prostitute and the subsequent suppression of her authority reveals much about the power dynamics and gender politics within the early church. The authentic letters of Paul, which champion the inclusion and equality of women, stand in stark contrast to the later texts attributed to him, which sought to relegate women to a submissive role. This shift highlights the struggle within the early church to maintain progressive ideas within the patriarchal norms of the time. Despite these historical attempts to marginalise women, modern scholarship and cultural shifts are reclaiming their rightful place in the narrative. The restoration of figures like Mary Magdalene to their true prominent positions will not only correct historical inaccuracies, but also inspires contemporary discussion on gender equality within religious contexts. As we look back on the stories we've explored throughout this series, one thing becomes abundantly clear. History is written by those in power. But the truth has a way of emerging, challenging us to reconsider what we thought we knew. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the lesser-known chapters of early Christianity. Your curiosity and willingness to explore these hidden stories are what keeps the spirit of inquiry alive. Series 2 is going to take a slightly different tact. The Council of Rome convened in 832 CE under the leadership of Pope Damasus I, and it was a pivotal event in the history of humanity. The Council is most notable for promulgating a definitive list of books in the Bible, establishing the 73-book scriptural canon that remains influential in the Catholic Church today. Yet a considerable number of Gospels and books were left out. We've already mentioned the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, but in Series 2 we're going to delve deeper into some of these missing Gospels and discover why they were not included in the Catholic canon. So until then, stay curious, stay questioning, and remember, There's always more to the story than what they taught you at school. I'm Mark Kerrigan. See you next time on They Didn't Teach That at School.